All right, so this is what we got so far. We've got our, it's adding things, and that's good. And we can check these, but they aren't changing anything in React, right? They're just only visually changing things. It doesn't change what we're actually able to utilize with it. And so that's what we're gonna work on next, is actually getting these to-dos, whether or not they're checked, to play out. And so theoretically what we could do is we go to this here, and we should be able to get this checked, this to-do that is complete. Oh, did I have it as is completed here? I bet I did. Is completed, yes I did. So I should be able to do is completed, and it should re-render. We should delete all this stuff, but we could do, walk the dog, and add this, and it is now false. Now here we already have this warning, so it says this will render a read-only field, and we don't have an on-change handler, so there's actually no way of changing this. It's just set to false. There's nothing we can do about it. And our components thing should also be maybe a little bit grouchy. Nope. But anyway, so we got is completed as false, and that's fine. It's displaying that it's false, but we can't change it at all. And so that's because this is not actually moving any information up to the top of our code. And that's a problem. So we're going to need to create some kind of function that actually changes whether or not it's checked. Now, you might think, oh, well, that's easy. What we'll do is we'll say, we'll create a function, change check equals, and what we'll basically just do is just an arrow function. I already know this isn't going to work, so I don't really care that much. Let's actually take the to do, and actually we'll do this dot is completed. Nope, we're just going to take the whole to do. I'm going to say dot is completed equals the opposite. And we can say on click equals, and instead of a string, we're going to say change check. And we're going to pass in the to do. And this should not work. I'll be shocked if it does. It's not a good way to do things. So refresh the page here, and I can say walk the dog. And uh-oh, it won't work, right? Why isn't it working? Well, that's because we're not actually changing, we're not passing that stuff all the way up to the top. And so we're going to need to pass something all the way down from our app.js and move that the whole way down. So let's go back to our app.js, and we're going to create a new function here. So we've got our add to do. I'm going to leave that at the top. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to have, I'm going to say const CheckBox. I'm going to pass in the ID, and then we're going to return all this other stuff. We're going to say const new stuff equals a copy of to-dos. Okay, so we want to have that. We're going to say const to-do equals new stuff dot find, and this is a JavaScript tool where we're going to be able to go over specific item, and we're going to find where the specific item dot ID equals ID. So we should be able to pass in an ID of some sort into this function and look through our new stuff, look through our copy of to-dos, and find the to-do where that ID is the correct attribute. And then after that, we're going to say to-do dot is completed equals bang to-do dot is completed. And then we're going to set to-dos, and that's really part of where we mess this up, to new stuff, right? And so again, this is going to change this particular thing here is going to actually find the thing inside of our new stuff and change whether or not the is completed attribute is done. And then we're going to end up setting the to-dos to the new stuff. So it's going to take that copy, change it, and then set that copy to our to-dos, right? Now, this is all fine and well, but there's not really a good way of taking this checkbox and using it inside of this interface, right? Because the checkbox is inside of to-do list, and inside of to-do list is the data loop, and that's where the checkbox actually lives. And so that's going to be a little bit tricky for us to actually do that. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to pass this function all the way through via props. And so, because again, we want to be able to change the stuff all the way at this level and pass it up and down. And so that's what we're going to do. So we're going to say checkbox equals, and what did we call this? Checkbox. Checkbox. Let's leave that the same thing. It doesn't really matter. Okay. But this means that we now have more props for to-do list to handle. So we're going to go ahead down there and take this in. We got to-dos, and now we're going to take checkbox. And we're now going to pass this checkbox function into our data loop. So it's going to go even another level down. I don't like the spaces here. That's just not how I generally write my props. So we're going to say checkbox equals checkbox, right? And again, we're just passing this down another level, but this is going to ultimately take the function from app.js from up here and use this same functionality, but we're going to be able to use that inside of our child components. So instead of change check, we're going to go to our data loop here, and so again, checked, this is fine because we're still just pulling that as a piece of information for our input. But we're going to say on change. And instead of all of this shenaniganery, what we'll end up doing is on change, we're going to say change checkbox. And that's because we're going to end up, this is still not quite right. What do you need to, there we go. What we're going to do instead is we're going to say const change checkbox. And it's not going to take anything in, but at this point we also need to take our checkbox in. I do wish React knew when I was passing props in and automatically handled that, but that's okay. I'm going to say checkbox, and we're going to say todo.id. And so this is how we're going to end up ultimately passing this the entire way up. Why are we, oh, this needs to be an arrow function, that's why. Yay, there we go. And this is where we're going to do our change checkbox. And this is ultimately going to work. So again, what we've done is we've taken the function from the top level, and that's where it's actually able to access set state, right? So we're actually going to be, that's why we had to do it this way, is because the set state particular thing, state only lives inside its own components. We actually have to pass the process all the way down while the actual app logic lives in the place where the set to-dos and the set state actually exist. Or the use state. So that's why that has to be the top level and get passed down a whole bunch. It might be a little bit confusing to you, but again, this, not there, here. This line here is why we have to have this at this level. And so again, all the other stuff is going to be here, but this set to-dos is what's ultimately going to be looking down into the child components, multiple components down, find some information, pass that back up, and then set that state. At the end of the day. So that's why we had to do it the way that we did. But now we should be able to head back to our app, refresh it, and say walk the dog, add item, and now it's changing. And you'll also notice that our to-dos here, now the is completed attribute right there, is actually changing when I'm clicking on it, which is great. It just takes a second for that function to load and the to-dos to reset. But that's great, and now we could have, you know, multiple things, eat, breakfast, etc., and you know, so we can actually keep track of that state, and it's actually changing the state inside of our app component. So that's great. So now we have to figure out this clear button that's just saying destroy them all right now, but that should be the last time we have to look inside of our data loop or our to-do list. So all of that stuff should basically be done for both of those. And so that's groovy. So now we're going to finish up our app.js. We have just a little bit more functionality. I'm going to close out our checkbox. We know what that does. I'm going to close out our add to do. We are done with both of those. The last little piece we have to do here is going to be our clear to-dos. And so all that we're going to do here is we're going to filter. So we're going to go over our to-dos and filter them. And we're going to look for where things are where they are not complete, and then we're going to save the ones that are not done yet. So it should be pretty straightforward actually. We're going to say const new to-dos equals to-dos.filter. I'm going to say specific item where specific item dot is completed. So this is going to say, hey, I'm going to look over our to-dos and find where they are not done, and set that to new to-dos. And then we're going to set to-dos new to-dos. And that should be fine. So now, we'll come back over here, refresh the page, walk the dog, eat breakfast, put on shoes, and when I select this and get rid of that, then it gets rid of only the ones that are actually checked off. And so now we have that, and our remaining items are 0. And I believe that's pretty much our entire code at this point. And yeah, that is what we are doing. So last thing we want to do, everything else here is happy. I'm not exactly sure what this manifest thing is. I think, again, so these are both, I know the DevTools one has to do with one of my extensions that's broken. Because again, talking about 16-year-olds that made the tools and then never touched them again. It was a really cool tool, man. I wish you kept working on it. I also have no clue which one it is that's being a problem. But so now those are all done, and our return statement's done. This is groovy, but now we're going to do some styling. So we don't need to worry about our JavaScript anymore. We're not concerned with any of these things. You can just get rid of that, but that gets rid of the JSX too. So now we're going to work with our app.css. I will eventually just have this whole app.css file available someplace else. But what we're going to want to do for now, and basically, so just as far as my CSS process, what I basically have done here is obviously the index.css. I still have the font family, and that's cool. But the way that I do my CSS sometimes is I basically create my own version of Bootstrap where I have classes that I can just call over and over again. And so we're going to see that real quick too. So we're going to have everything will get a padding of 3 pixels. That's fine. I've already messed with the body. 0 pixels of margin. The color will be white. And the background color will be RGB. We're going to do 39, 39, 39. Let's see what that looks like. I like that. Just a nice dark gray. And so, but that's just the index.css. And so with the body tag, again, these are just a couple different ways that you could theoretically do this, where you have your import for there. And then these attributes in the app.css will apply to everything below the app level and down. And so next thing we're going to do is we're going to have .flex-column, and we're going to say display flex. We're going to have flex direction will be a column, as you probably figured out by the class name. Justify content will be center. And then last, we're going to have align items center. Great. Okay. And then we're going to have the same thing for, we got a couple other classes here. I'm just going to copy paste them real quick because this is not a CSS class. But if you need to pause the video, we got flex row, where it's the same as flex column, just a row instead of a column. Margin top, 50 pixels, margin 5, and padding 5. And then we're just going to reuse a whole bunch of these things throughout the rest of the app. So now we're going to head to app.js. We're going to check out our JSX here. What we're going to do is we're actually going to wrap all of this inside of another div. And what I'm going to add here is class name. Now you'll notice if you've been messing around with a lot of CSS, you'll notice here that this is different than class, right? You're like, wait a second, that's not normal. Usually with HTML, we'll use a class. That is correct. That's absolutely accurate. The thing is, class has some power in JavaScript, and this is a JavaScript file, right? So if we were to use class, we'd end up with an error because we will get an error because JavaScript is going to try to actually render this as a class, right? It's going to say, oh, you mean like object-oriented classes, right? So that's why we use class name. Oops. We use class name here. And that ends up being how the CSS gets styled in React. So we're going to say flex column and margin top. That should be fine. And we actually should already start seeing things happening. That already looks a whole lot better. And so walk with the dog, you add that. This actually has already worked out remarkably well. Eat breakfast, and there we go. And we got both of those, and that's pretty groovy actually already. I'm actually pretty happy with that even just as it is right now, but we're gonna do just a little bit more. Our input is just fine. The next we have this div here. We just wanna make sure that this is gonna be class name is gonna be flex-row. And then our buttons, let's give them a little bit more space here. So we're gonna do, nope. I'm gonna take these, and put the space here, and we're gonna say class name equals padding -5, margin -5. And so all that I did there is you can highlight something and use Command D or Control D, and that will do multi-cursors. It will just copy any place you see that, so I can change all of the divs in my file to something else if I wanted to, right, by doing this kind of a thing, which is cool, but that's not what I want to do. So then you got that. I think that's it for this, and then I don't think the to-do list had any styling. Nope. And the data loop did have some styling, so let's go ahead and hop in there. So this div is going to be class name flex column, and our label is going to be a flex row, and that should be it for all of our styling at this point. And so that's how you do CSS in in React. Is you can have a specific app.css file. This is probably the easiest and cleanest way to do it. There's like 5 million ways of doing this. Yeah, so we just got a little bit more space now between everything, and that's fine. And so you can just refresh the page, walk, eat. And obviously we could do a little bit more styling. The Vue app that I end up doing is very similar to this. I do a lot more styling on that one. Just because I really like the way that Vue does things. But you could have a little bit more space. You could have a little like light box behind it, and that would be just fine. Now there's a few things still with React that we have not played with on this piece of code, and that would be things like pages, right? If you have multiple pages in your application, that's a pretty big one. We haven't connected to an API or moved any actual data from outside around. So this has all been synchronous. It's all been basically instantaneous. But as far as just the raw basic tools for how React works, you've got your props and state. Those are the two really big ones. The ref hook is another one that's a little bit newer that we should get a pretty good grasp on. And again, if you want to, you can Google those things. You can say, how does a ref work? How does use state work? Those kinds of things. Highly recommend if you're still confused on those, do a little bit more research. But again, use state, basically, when you go back and look at this, again, you have a piece of state and you have a function to update it. And that's basically what it is. And then you just have a default for what that state is there. And again, the point of this is that we're making copies of our data. You don't want to overwrite your original data. It looks like we're overwriting things, but we're actually not. React will actually keep track of what's going on in the background when we're using these hooks. And that's really valuable because, again, if you're overwriting data, you can quickly accidentally overwrite things that are really important. And we want to be able to keep track of that. And React does that in the background for us. There are tools we can use to actually retrieve that stuff. You just usually don't need to. But this is a safer way of writing our code than just using raw JavaScript to do this. And again, this is a sort of, you could probably figure out how to use JavaScript to do most of this stuff all on its own out in the wild without React. That might be a little bit challenging to do. And most websites are a little bit more complex than what we've made. And so that's going to be something we're going to look at. Our next application that we do with React is going to be much more ornate, lots more going on. Very cool application, but a lot more going on. And what I want you to figure out is, again, kind of the basics. What are components, right? How do you move them into one another? So again, we've got this to-do list component. What are components? What is props? What is state? What are hooks? And how does this whole thing kind of start working so that when we get to our next application, it's not nearly as chaotic when we get there. So hopefully this made sense to you. Again, if you have questions or comments, feel free to reach out to the Coding Temple staff. I'm more than happy to help you. But welcome to React, and I'm excited to see where the rest of this journey takes us. So see you in the next project.